Unaware his ex-wife is the secret billionaire CEO of his company, husband invited her to his new wedding to humiliate her. What happened next? He didn't just move on. He slid divorce papers across a small home office desk, told his wife she was holding him back, and walked out with a new future on his arm and a speech about winning on his lips. That morning, Evelyn Hart steadied her breath while the printer hummed and the coffee went cold. Her husband Daniel stood in their doorway, eyes glittering with ambition. "I'm filing," he said. "I need someone who understands where I'm going." The door closed. The silence stayed. He thought he'd traded a quiet wife for a louder life. He thought the company would always orbit his name, that the pitch decks she edited and the numbers she balanced were just support. He thought she'd vanish into bills and blank days, and he'd rise. But what he never knew was this. The woman he erased learned to write in ink the world couldn't see. Nights became lessons, paper became power, a faceless boardroom with no photographs learned a new name, Eva Carter. And when the city finally learned to say it, they still didn't know who she truly was. Then a gold-foiled envelope arrived, Daniel and Sophie, a wedding meant to parade victory and bury the past in front of witnesses. He wanted her there to watch him shine. He wanted the cameras, the laughter, the toast, to leaving the past where it belongs. Evelyn, now Ava, smoothed the invitation, looked out over a skyline she once feared, and whispered, "Congratulations, because some stages are built for spotlight and some for switches." Dear viewers, thanks for being here. If you watch without subscribing, it's like letting Evelyn's voice fade back into the noise. Hit subscribe to stand with the quiet ones who plan, the erased who return, and the hearts that learn to lead. Tell me where you're watching from, and listen closely. There's a reason the press arrived early tonight. The morning began not with calm, but with the sharp hiss of the coffee machine breaking silence. Steam filled the tiny home office like smoke after battle. Evelyn Hart, 32, stood in her soft cardigan, her hair tied loosely as she poured 2 mugs of coffee, one black, one sweetened exactly the way Daniel liked it. She didn't need to ask anymore. She knew every rhythm of his life. Across the small desk sat Daniel Hart, 35, her husband, charming, focused, and restless. His eyes, once full of laughter, now burned with something else, hunger for success. He leaned toward the laptop, muttering lines from a presentation. Innovation, leadership, vision. His voice carried pride, a kind of ownership. Evelyn placed his coffee beside him, smiling softly. "Maybe add something about teamwork. Investors like that." He glanced at her for half a second, then back at the screen. "Good idea," he said absently, already typing. His fingers moved fast, his tone clipped. Polite, distant. She didn't notice the distance. She heard only the word good. Evelyn had always believed in him more than anyone. Her story began long before this small home office. She was the only daughter of a quiet philanthropist, a man who built a fortune in private equity but lived like a humble accountant. Her father left her 2 things, a small liquid inheritance and a second massive trust worth hundreds of millions, locked away until she was either 40 or was no longer married. She'd never told Daniel about the trust. She wanted a love that wasn't transactional. She remembered the night 3 years ago, rain tapping on the roof. Daniel, his voice shaking with hope, had whispered, "If I can just get this prototype running, we'll be free, Evelyn." Evelyn, wrapped in a blanket, had looked at him and seen not a struggling man, but a dreamer worth following. "Take it," she had said, sliding her father's check, her entire liquid inheritance, toward him. "Use it. Build something we can both be proud of." And that was the start of it, the seed of their company, Hart Technologies. Except, as the company grew, the name began to feel smaller. Not theirs, just his. Back in the present, she sat beside him, editing his slides on her tablet. Her eyes followed his cursor as he rearranged bullet points. Leadership, growth, expansion. She noticed something. Under founding members, only one name glowed in bold, Daniel Hart. Her fingers froze. She leaned slightly closer, pretending to adjust the margin. "You didn't put my name." He chuckled softly, distracted. "You're my wife, Eve. Everyone knows we built it together. I just need to keep it simple for investors. Her chest tightened, but she smiled. Right, simple. He kissed her forehead, still not looking away from the screen. When we make it big, it'll be our company. Those words, soft and confident, carried her hope. She believed him. She wanted to believe him. The home office smelled of coffee and printed paper. Light spilled through the blinds, striping across her face as she studied his slide deck. She noticed subtle shifts. He'd removed the family-first mission statement they wrote together. The vision that once said, "Building innovation through trust and shared purpose," now read, "A company led by determination and individual vision." Individual. She bit her lip, unsure if it was intentional or just business polish. Still, something in her chest flickered. A quiet unease she pushed away. Evelyn's mind wandered to her late father's voice. Never invest everything in one person, not even love. She brushed away the thought. Daniel was different. They'd faced too much together. Daniel suddenly leaned back in his chair, satisfied. There, he said, grinning. Ready to send to the board. She turned the laptop slightly, scanning it once more. Her eyes fell on a small note at the bottom, a line of legal text she hadn't written. Prepared by D. Hart, sole proprietor. Her smile froze. Daniel noticed her pause. Oh, don't worry about that, he said quickly, closing the laptop. It's just technical stuff for the application. We'll fix it later. He stood stretching and took his mug. Thanks for the coffee, babe. Couldn't do this without you. He left the room humming, confident. Evelyn sat alone, the light dimming around her. Her reflection stared back from the dark laptop screen. Quiet, small, uncertain. She hesitated, then reopened the file. Her name had been there yesterday. She was sure of it. Now the partnership acknowledgement section was gone, deleted cleanly. The cursor blinked in the empty space as if waiting for her to retype it. Her fingers hovered above the keyboard. She almost added it back. Evelyn Hart, co-founder, but stopped. What if he was right? What if investors wanted simplicity? She closed the laptop gently, pushing away doubt. In the distance, she heard Daniel on the phone, laughing with someone, a woman's laugh echoing faintly through the walls. She told herself it was just a client. Still, her hand lingered on the lid of the laptop, her eyes fixed on that blinking cursor in memory. Sometimes the smallest erasure is the beginning of something much bigger. And with that quiet thought, Evelyn rose from her chair, unaware that this small missing name would one day become the sharpest weapon she ever held. The sound of clinking glasses filled the elegant restaurant like soft thunder. Laughter rippled across the table, but under the golden lights, Evelyn Hart sat still, her smile faint and practiced. Daniel, her husband, was in his element, confident, loud, glowing with success. Just 3 weeks had passed since the morning she noticed her name missing from the company pitch, and now Daniel had investors hanging on every word. Gentlemen, Daniel said, raising his glass, to Hart Technologies, a company built from vision, sweat, and sleepless nights. His grin widened. My vision, to be exact. The table erupted in polite applause. Evelyn laughed softly with them, hiding the sting in her chest. Beside her sat Mr. Grant, a silver-haired investor with keen eyes and a calm authority that made the others listen. He turned toward Evelyn. Mrs. Hart, he said with genuine curiosity, I heard you managed the early accounting during the prototype phase. Impressive numbers for a startup that size. Evelyn smiled humbly. Just simple bookkeeping. Daniel handled the big decisions. Daniel cut in before she could finish. Evelyn's always been my rock, he said smoothly, placing a hand over hers for show. Not really business-minded, but she keeps me sane. The investors chuckled. Evelyn's smile didn't falter, but her eyes dropped to her plate. The hand Daniel had placed over hers was warm, but it felt like a weight pressing her silence into the tablecloth. Inside, she was remembering nights she spent crunching numbers while he slept, the marketing copy she'd written for their first launch, the endless rejection emails she softened with words of encouragement. Not business-minded, he'd said. Mr. Grant gave her a small, knowing nod. Sometimes, he said, swirling his wine, it's the quiet ones behind the numbers who build the real foundation. Daniel laughed it off. Maybe so, but this one prefers to stay out of the spotlight. The conversation moved on. Projections, potential, expansion. But Evelyn's attention drifted. Her mind replayed her father's warning again. Never invest everything in one person. Her thoughts snapped back when she noticed the menu's prices. Daniel ordered without hesitation, but she caught the flicker of his wrist. His wedding ring gleamed beside a new, sleek watch she hadn't seen before. A luxury brand. After dinner, as they stepped outside, Daniel's arm draped around her shoulders. "That went great," he said, his breath visible in the cool night air. "Finally, real money." "You proud of me?" She smiled. "Always." But he didn't look at her when he said, "From now on, things are going to move fast. Investors need confidence. I'll handle public meetings. You can focus on, well, the home stuff." The words hit her like cold water. "Of course," she said softly, "if that's what helps." He kissed her cheek absent-mindedly and walked ahead to greet another businessman by a black car. Evelyn watched him laugh easily, his hand resting too long on the man's assistant's arm. Sophie, a young woman with striking red lipstick and a quick smile. Sophie glanced over her shoulder, her gaze meeting Evelyn's for half a second. Not with guilt, but with curiosity, like she was already measuring her. Evelyn's heartbeat quickened. Daniel's voice carried through the night. "You'll be seeing more of Sophie. She's helping me with marketing from now on." Evelyn nodded faintly, her expression unreadable. "Of course," she said again. As they drove home, Daniel hummed along to the radio, tapping his fingers against the steering wheel. Evelyn turned to the window, watching city lights blur into streaks of gold. Her reflection looked foreign, patient, quiet, but something beneath that patience was changing. A seed had been planted in the silence. Sometimes neglect doesn't break love. It feeds the roots of something far more dangerous. And in the faint reflection of the glass, Evelyn's eyes glimmered. Calm, but already beginning to sharpen. The office was alive with energy. Phones ringing, keyboards tapping, voices blending in a storm of ambition. But the storm's eye sat right in the center of the glass conference room, where Daniel Hart stood, his sleeves rolled up, charisma pouring from every word. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, clapping his hands, "this is the team that's going to change the industry." His grin was dazzling, the grin that had once been reserved only for Evelyn, his wife. At the far end of the room, a new face leaned forward, her laughter a sharp melody cutting through the professional tone. Sophie Lane, 28, the new marketing consultant, was hard to miss. Tall, confident, and dressed in a way that made everyone else seem underdressed. Her red lipstick shone like a mark of victory. Daniel pointed toward the screen behind him. "Sophie here came up with the new ad pitch. Clever, bold, exactly what we need to stand out." The room applauded. Evelyn, seated near the corner as the company's silent co-founder, smiled politely. But her smile faded as she noticed Sophie's hand brush Daniel's arm, casually as if it were already familiar. Sophie met Evelyn's eyes and smiled. Professional, but slightly too knowing. The meeting continued, but Evelyn's mind drifted backward. Months earlier, when the company had been nothing more than 2 laptops and a dream, Evelyn had once said over dinner, "Daniel, promise me something. Never mix work with temptation. It ruins good men." He had laughed back then, leaning across the table, brushing her cheek with his thumb. "You worry too much. You're the only temptation I'll ever need." Now, as Sophie leaned closer to whisper something into Daniel's ear, Evelyn could almost hear that same sentence echo like a cruel joke. After the meeting, Daniel called for everyone to leave the presentation files with him. Sophie stayed behind. "I can stay a bit longer," she offered. "We can polish the numbers together." Evelyn waited a beat, hoping Daniel would decline. He didn't. "Sure," he said easily. "You've got a great eye for presentation. Evelyn, you can head home. I'll be late." Her voice caught in her throat. "Do you need me to review the financials again?" No, he interrupted, smiling without looking at her. "Sophie's got this." The room grew awkwardly quiet. Sophie turned back to her laptop, pretending not to notice. Evelyn gathered her notes, her movements careful and precise, every second stretching longer than it should. Outside the conference room, She paused by the door. Through the glass, she saw them both laughing again. Sophie tossed her hair back. Daniel's hand brushed the back of her chair. The scene looked harmless from afar, but something about the easy intimacy felt wrong. As Evelyn walked down the corridor, she caught her reflection in the window. Pale, tired, almost transparent. She wondered when she had become part of the background in her own company. At the reception desk, the young intern, Liam, 19, bright and eager, gave her a small, sympathetic look. "Rough meeting?" he asked. Evelyn forced a smile. "No, just long." But when she reached the elevator, she heard laughter again echo from the glass walls above. Sophie's voice, playful and confident. That night, Evelyn sat alone at the kitchen table, laptop open, editing a budget sheet. Daniel came home hours later, smelling faintly of cologne and champagne. "Late dinner with the investors," he said easily, dropping his jacket on the couch. "Sophie was there too. She's got real drive. Reminds me of you back in the early days." Evelyn's fingers stilled on the keyboard. "Back in the early days," she repeated softly. "When it was us." Daniel laughed lightly, missing the weight in her voice. "You'll always be part of it, Eve. But I've got to network, stay visible. That's how success works." She nodded, saying nothing more. When he left to shower, she noticed his phone on the counter, face down. The screen lit up. One new message. A name appeared briefly before the light dimmed again. Sophie Lane. "Tonight was amazing. You always make work exciting." Evelyn stared at the glow until it faded completely. Her chest felt heavy, but her face remained still. She picked up the phone, hesitated, then set it back exactly where it was. In her mind, her father's voice returned once more. "The moment you feel unseen, start watching." Outside, wind pressed against the windows. Somewhere upstairs, Daniel hummed a tune as if nothing in the world had changed, but everything had. Sometimes betrayal doesn't shout. It whispers through laughter that lasts too long. And as Evelyn turned off the kitchen light, her shadow stretched across the floor. Long, quiet, and already beginning to move towards something colder. The night began with thunder, not from the sky, but from the front door slamming open. Daniel Hart stumbled inside, his laughter echoing through the dimly lit living room. His tie hung loose, his shirt untucked, and the faint smell of wine filled the air. Evelyn sat at the dining table, papers spread out in front of her. The quarterly reports, profit margins, invoices, all work she had quietly done behind the scenes. Her eyes flicked up as he entered, the storm in his step louder than his voice. "Late again," she said softly, not accusing, just tired. Daniel waved his hand dismissively. "Investor dinner. Don't wait up next time, Eve. You don't need to worry about business matters anymore." Her eyes lowered to his jacket draped over his arm. "You said the dinner was with investors," she murmured. "It was." Then he tossed the jacket onto the couch. A flash of crimson caught her eye. Faint but unmistakable, a smear of red lipstick on the collar. Her breath hitched. The shade was familiar. Sophie's red. The room seemed to shrink. Time slowed. She stood up, her hands trembling slightly as she picked up the jacket. "Daniel," she said quietly. "What's this?" He glanced at her, irritation crossing his face. "Eve, don't start. It's Sophie's lipstick." He sighed, rubbing his forehead. "You're being dramatic. It's just a mark, maybe from a hug. You're reading into things." Her voice cracked, though she kept it low. "You promised me once, never mix work with temptation." He laughed, cold and tired. "You really still think in those old terms? This is business. You don't understand how these things work." Something inside her broke quietly like glass behind the ribs. "Then explain it to me," she whispered. He looked at her for a long second. Not with guilt, not even with regret, just annoyance. "You're holding me back, Evelyn. You want me to stay small, safe, dependent. I'm not that man anymore." She froze. The sentence hit harder than any scream could. Her mind flashed. Quick. Bright images, her wedding ring slipping onto her finger as they promised forever. Selling her father's watch to pay for his prototype. Cooking noodles for dinner for weeks so he could afford better parts. Staying up till dawn editing his first investor proposal. Every memory blurred together, forming a single truth. Everything she had built for them was slowly being erased, one word, one lie, one lipstick mark at a time. Daniel poured himself a drink, ignoring her silence. Look, you're a good woman, but you're not built for this world. I need someone who understands image, progress, drive. Sophie, she said simply. He didn't deny it. He just shrugged. She gets it. Evelyn felt her knees weaken, but she caught herself on the table. All these years, Daniel. Everything we've built. He turned to her sharply. I built it. That broke the last piece of her restraint. Still, she didn't cry, didn't scream. She walked to the desk, opened a drawer, and pulled out a single folder. Inside were the company registration documents. The sole proprietor line stared back at her. Daniel had already refiled it under his own name, locking her out. Her hands shook as she looked at the signature. You already removed me. He exhaled, almost relieved that the truth was out. It's simpler this way. Don't make it ugly. He reached into his briefcase and, as if it were routine, placed a white envelope on the table. I had the papers drawn up. You deserve something easy. No fighting, no drama. Evelyn opened it slowly. Divorce papers. Her voice was steady. You prepared this before tonight. I told you, he said coldly. It's time to move on. She looked up at him, tears finally welling, but her tone stayed calm. Then let's finish what you started. She picked up a pen, signed her name with shaking fingers, and slid the papers back across the table. Daniel smiled faintly, satisfied. You'll thank me later, Eve. You'll never survive without me. The words lingered, cutting deeper than the silence that followed. He left the room, humming that same tune from the night before. Evelyn sat still for a long time, the thunder outside now matching the ache in her chest. Her reflection in the window looked different, not broken, just emptied. Then slowly she whispered to herself, He's wrong. She gathered the scattered company papers, folded them neatly, and placed them in her briefcase. The things he erased would soon become the foundation of everything she'd build. And as lightning flashed across the sky, Evelyn's tear-streaked face hardened. Not with rage, but with a quiet promise the world hadn't seen yet. The rain wasn't gentle that night. It hammered against the windows like the world itself was trying to break in. Evelyn Hart sat on the floor of a small, dim apartment, surrounded by moving boxes. The once polished woman who used to walk through conference rooms now wore an old sweater, her eyes red. Her hands trembled as she opened another letter. Final notice on their old apartment lease. She let it fall beside the others. The sound of paper hitting the floor was softer than the sound of her heartbeat breaking apart. It had been 3 months since Daniel left. He'd taken the company, the house, the friends who had once called her the real genius. The world saw him as the visionary, and her as the shadow that vanished behind him. She stared at the cracked clock on the wall. Midnight. She hadn't eaten all day. She whispered to the empty room, I built everything for him, and he erased me. She felt utterly, completely alone. Then her father's voice echoed in her memory, sharp and clear. The trust is there for a reason, Evelyn. It's not a gift, it's a shield. The trust, the one that unlocked upon her divorce. Her breath hitched. The fog of despair began to clear, replaced by something cold and sharp. She stood up, her movements suddenly precise. She walked to her briefcase and pulled out a small leather-bound notebook. Inside, on the last page, was a single name and a number. Mr. Raines, executor. Her fingers still trembling, dialed the number. Mr. Raines, she said, her voice hoarse. Evelyn, is everything all right? I've been waiting for your call since the divorce was filed. I'm ready, she whispered, a tear of anger, not sadness, slipping down her cheek. I'm ready to access the trust. There was a pause on the line, then Mr. Raines's voice, warm but firm. Very good. The shield is yours, my dear. What's your first move? Evelyn looked out the window at the rain-slicked city, at the towering offices where Daniel was probably celebrating. Teach me, she said, her voice no longer a whisper. Teach me how to build an empire he'll never see coming. Foreshadowing line, sometimes the ones erased from history come back to rewrite it, one quiet move at a time. And as Evelyn listened to the lawyer on the phone, The rain outside no longer sounded like mourning. It sounded like applause. The story began again. Not with pain this time, but with fire. The sound of clicking keys filled a sleek, modern office as Evelyn Hart sat at her laptop, light from the screen painting her face in blue. Her eyes were sharper now, her hair cut into a severe, elegant bob. It had been 6 months since she called Mr. Raines. He had become her silent mentor, guiding her through the complexities of the fortune her father left. His lessons were brutal but fair. How to read markets, how to find opportunity in loss, how to hide power in plain sight. Power doesn't shout, he told her. It signs papers quietly while the loud ones celebrate. Those words became her code. Evelyn worked through finance certifications during the day, investment webinars at night. Her nights bled into mornings and her confidence grew from ashes. She started small, advised by Raines, learning the language of shadows. Then one morning in front of a mirror, she whispered to herself, "Evelyn Hart is gone. She was erased." She reached for a pen. She filed for a legal name change, a quiet one, a new identity built from her own ashes, Eva Carter. Under that name, she registered a holding company, Haven Investments, LLC. No one connected it to her. Not even Raines's associates knew her true identity. Through Haven, she began acquiring small, struggling tech firms, the kind Daniel's company had once mocked. She made calls late into the night. "Keep my name off the record," she'd say, her voice now clipped and authoritative, echoing in the quiet room. "Use shell firms. Transfer the assets quietly." Each acquisition built upon the last. Her balance sheets grew. Her reputation, though faceless, became whispered among the industry's sharpest minds. In quiet moments, she thought about Daniel, his smirk, his arrogance. The thought no longer hurt. It fueled her. Late one evening, a thick envelope arrived from Raines. Inside was a stack of reports, upcoming acquisitions under review. Her eyes scanned the list and froze. Hart Technology sat printed in black ink, right in the middle. Her breath caught. The man who destroyed her might soon become part of her empire. She leaned back slowly, a faint, knowing smile curving her lips. Sometimes revenge doesn't begin with anger. It begins with a signature. And as the city lights flickered against her window, Eva Carter began planning her quiet war. The sound of a ticking clock filled the wide glass office. Slow, deliberate, powerful. It wasn't the kind of office that screamed wealth. It whispered it. Clean white walls, one long table, no photographs. At the center sat Eva Carter, once Evelyn Hart, now 35, composed, elegant, unreadable. Her reflection gleamed faintly against the skyline behind her, towering above a city she now quietly owned. On her desk lay a single newspaper, the headline bold, Haven Investments, the mysterious firm controlling half the tech market. But who is Eva Carter? Below the headline, a photo of a boardroom. Faceless executives, no trace of her. No one knew who Eva Carter truly was. She flipped through the paper slowly. Every word confirmed what she'd built from the wreckage of her old life. A quiet empire that controlled others without ever revealing its queen. Her assistant Clara entered, mid-20s, sharp eyes, loyal since the beginning. "Ms. Carter, the quarterly reports are in. Haven's now the majority shareholder of 4 new firms." Eva nodded without looking up. "Any press inquiries?" 3, all turned down, per your instruction. They keep asking who you are." "Let them wonder," Eva said simply. Clara smiled. "You like the mystery." Eva paused, glancing toward the skyline. "Mystery keeps people from aiming at you." She rose, walking toward the large window. From there she could see the heart of the business district. The same streets where Daniel once strutted like a king. The thought didn't sting anymore. It simply reminded her how far she'd come. Flashback, the small apartment. Raines's patient voice. "Power is quieter when unseen." Those words had become her armor. Raines had since retired, but his lessons lingered in every strategic move she made. Clara's voice broke her thought. "There's something interesting on the acquisition list for next quarter. One of the tech companies is requesting emergency funding. Daniels Tech Inc. Eva turned, her face calm but her pulse sharp. Repeat that. Daniels Tech. He renamed Hart Technologies after the divorce. Their stocks have dropped 30% since the new product failed. They're desperate for investors. Silence stretched across the room. Eva walked back to her desk and opened her laptop. On the screen, Daniel's face appeared in a business interview. Confident but tired. Arrogance cracked with worry. She watched him for a long moment. His voice was older now, less certain. We'll recover, he said on screen. We always do. Eva closed the laptop softly. Prepare a private review of their financials, she said. Clara nodded. Do you want me to contact them directly? Eva's tone was calm, almost gentle. Not yet. Let's see how deep their wounds are. When Clara left, Eva sat back and exhaled. Her fingers brushed against the glass table. Cool, smooth, steady, like her. In the reflection, she didn't see Evelyn Hart anymore. That woman had been erased, replaced by someone who understood patience and control. But as she looked at Daniel's faint image still flickering in memory, a strange, calm smile touched her lips. Sometimes fate doesn't need chasing. It walks right back into your empire, begging for rescue. And with that, Eva Carter picked up her phone and began to plan the meeting that would reunite her with the man who once swore she'd never survive without him. The flash of cameras burst across the stage as Daniel Hart stood tall, hands spread wide, smile polished to perfection. The banner behind him read, Daniels Tech, merging into the future. Applause thundered through the auditorium. Ladies and gentlemen, Daniel said, voice booming, this merger marks the next great leap in innovation. We're partnering with one of the most powerful investment firms in the world, Haven Investments. The crowd cheered again. Sophie Lane, now his fiancée, stood beside him, glowing in a white suit, her engagement ring catching the light. She leaned in, whispering, You did it, Daniel. You're unstoppable. Daniel's grin widened. I always am. But behind the confident posture, Daniel's eyes carried something else. Desperation disguised as pride. Daniel's Tech had been bleeding money for months. His product launch had failed. Investors were pulling out. And this takeover, which he was spinning as a merger, was his only lifeline. Still, to the public, he played the role of the visionary who could never lose. After the event, in the boardroom, champagne flowed freely. Daniel toasted with his executives, laughter filling the air. You know, he said smugly, if my ex-wife could see me now, she'd faint. Probably still running spreadsheets in her little apartment. The staff laughed nervously. Only Mason, the PR manager, dared to speak up. Actually, sir, he said cautiously, the final merger papers need to be signed by Haven's CEO before the deal is official. We're waiting for their confirmation. Daniel scoffed. Paperwork. This mysterious Eva Carter always thinks she holds the power. Let her take her time. Sophie brushed his arm affectionately. You should show them who's in charge. Maybe fly out and meet the CEO. He waved her off. Please, whoever they are, they'll bow to me soon enough. Everyone does. Flashback. For a moment, the memory of Evelyn's quiet eyes flashed across his mind. The night she signed the divorce papers, her silence sharper than words. He quickly pushed it away, forcing a laugh. People like her were meant to watch. People like me were meant to rule. The team clapped again, and Daniel raised his glass high. To the future. But behind the glass walls of the boardroom, the city lights glimmered. Cold, silent, watching. Somewhere in one of those towers, his new partner was already planning her move. The higher a man builds his throne, the louder the world hears it when it cracks. And as Daniel laughed under the flashing lights far across the city, Eva Carter quietly signed a document that would decide his fate. The gold envelope landed on Eva Carter's desk with a soft thud, but the sound hit like thunder. Its edges gleamed under the office light, heavy, expensive, deliberate. Her assistant Clara set it down carefully, not realizing she had just placed a spark on a trail of hidden fire. Courier said it was hand-delivered, Clara said. Eva looked up from her laptop, her calm expression unchanging. Who's it from? Clara flipped the envelope, reading the embossed print. Her voice faltered. Daniel Hart and Sophie Lane. The room fell quiet. The city lights outside shimmered across the tall glass windows as Eva's fingers brushed the golden foil. She broke the seal. Inside, the invitation gleamed. "You are cordially invited to the wedding of Daniel Hart and Sophie Lane." Her jaw tightened just slightly. The edges of her control pressed hard against old wounds. The voice in her head, calm, steady, deliberate, spoke like a narration of her thoughts. He wanted to parade his victory in front of the ghost he buried. The memory of their last conversation flickered, Daniel's smug voice echoing, "You'll never survive without me." She exhaled slowly. "He still thinks I didn't." Clara watched her carefully. "Do you want me to discard it?" Eva set the invitation flat on her desk, eyes narrowing with quiet precision. "No," she said softly. "This is the most interesting mail I've received in years." Clara hesitated. "Then, will you attend?" Eva leaned back in her chair, her reflection meeting hers in the glass wall behind her. The reflection of a woman who had once been erased and rebuilt herself from nothing. "Yes," she said finally. "It's time I met my new employee." Clara blinked, confused. "Your employee?" Eva's smile was calm, knowing. "Daniel's Tech. Haven is set to finalize the controlling shares tonight. The final signature is due at midnight on the day of his wedding. He just doesn't know who signs his paychecks yet." Clara's lips parted in shock. "Ma'am, you—" Eva stood, her movements smooth, deliberate. "Arrange my travel for the weekend. No public escort, no security detail. I'll attend quietly." Then she turned toward the window, her eyes fixed on the city below, the same city where Daniel once dismissed her as unimportant. The skyline gleamed like chess pieces waiting for her next move. A montage flickered in her mind, signing the divorce papers, calling Rains the first time she saw Haven's profit turn upward. Every sacrifice, every tear had led to this moment. Her fingers traced the golden lettering again. Daniel and Sophie. The letters looked fragile, beautiful, but easy to burn. Across her desk, the reflection of the invitation glimmered against her glass table, like gold dust over ice. "Prepare a gift," she said suddenly. Clara frowned. "What kind of gift?" Eva's lips curved faintly. "Something memorable." She picked up the invitation, holding it to the light until it glowed. For the first time in years, her heart didn't ache when she said his name. It felt steady, powerful, and entirely in control. Some invitations are written on paper. Others are written in fate. Eva placed the invitation neatly in her drawer. The decision was made. The fountain pen scratched across the document like a blade cutting through silk. Eva Carter sat in her private office, the air around her sharp with tension and quiet power. Across from her sat Ms. Green, a seasoned corporate lawyer in her 50s, known for her calm precision and unwavering loyalty. Stacks of legal folders covered the table, and at the top of one, the words glowed in embossed silver. Haven Investments. Daniel's Tech merger finalization. Ms. Green's tone was steady but carried weight. "This is it, Ms. Carter. The merger's final sign-off is due at midnight tonight. Once you sign, Haven Investments will officially hold 100% of Daniel's Tech's controlling shares." Eva's pen paused mid-air. The air conditioning hummed softly in the background, matching the rhythm of her heartbeat. "And he doesn't know?" Ms. Green shook her head. "No, ma'am. The structure we set up, through the holding companies in Zurich and Seattle, hides the ownership trail completely. He believes Haven is just another faceless investor. He has no idea who's behind it." Eva smiled faintly, calm but deadly. "Perfect." Ms. Green continued, flipping a page. "For legal clarity, this means Daniel's Tech, its assets, its patents, everything will transfer under your direct control within 24 hours of this signature." The lawyer hesitated, studying her. "Are you sure you want this? You've built your empire in the shadows for years." Eva set the pen down for a moment, eyes distant. "For years I owned everything but had no name. Now I want my name attached. Not out of pride, but to close the circle." Miss Green gave a knowing nod. "Understood." Eva signed with deliberate slowness, Every curve of the signature felt like reclaiming a piece of herself. Evelyn Hart had been erased once. Eva Carter was writing her resurrection. After a pause, Ms. Green slid another document forward. We'll file this electronically at midnight. That makes the transfer official by dawn, which means, Eva finished the sentence, her voice calm but razor sharp, which means by the time he says I do, he'll already belong to me. Ms. Green's lips curled into a thin smile. A poetic outcome. Eva leaned back, her gaze fixed on the skyline outside her window. The city below glittered like chess pieces, and she was finally the queen moving last. She remembered her first lesson with Rains years ago, his voice steady, wise. Own nothing in your name until it's time to be seen. Then appear only when the world thinks you've vanished. The timing, the patience, the silence, all of it had led to this moment. Ms. Green gathered the papers into her briefcase. Everything is in motion. What shall I tell the press if they reach out after the filing? Eva stood slowly, straightening her black blazer. Tell them nothing. The truth will speak for itself soon enough. She picked up her fountain pen again, twirling it once between her fingers. The same pen Daniel had gifted her when they built their first company together. Her eyes hardened. Then I'll deliver my wedding gift personally. Some gifts don't come wrapped in ribbon, they come wrapped in revelation. And as the clock struck midnight, Eva's signature gleamed under the office light, sealing not only a document, but Daniel Hart's fate. The hall shimmered with golden lights, chandeliers glinting like stars trapped above the crowd. Every seat was filled, every whisper sharp with curiosity. Reporters hovered near the entrance, their cameras already raised, hungry for the perfect shot. And then the doors opened. Eva Carter, once Evelyn Hart, stepped inside. Her black gown flowed like quiet power, elegant yet understated. Her heels clicked against the marble floor, each step deliberate, unhurried. Conversations faltered. Heads turned. Gas rippled through the room. Someone whispered, "That's his ex-wife." Another voice followed, "She actually came." At the altar, Daniel Hart noticed the shift. His grin faltered for just a second, then returned sharper, smug. Standing beside him in glittering white was Sophie Lane, radiant and proud, clutching his arm as if she'd already won every war that mattered. Daniel's jaw tightened, but he recovered quickly. "Well," he muttered under his breath, "this should be fun." As Eva walked further in, flashes of cameras began to pop, each one freezing her in time. Not as the woman he once left, but as something more composed, more dangerous. Her eyes scanned the room slowly, taking in familiar faces. Investors who once doubted her, employees who once whispered behind her back. None dared meet her gaze for long. When she reached the front row, Daniel descended the small steps, adjusting his tie with theatrical confidence. "Evelyn," he greeted, his voice low enough for nearby guests to overhear. "Glad you could make it. I was afraid you'd be too sentimental for occasions like this." She smiled faintly, her calmness disarming. "Congratulations, Daniel," she said softly. "You've outdone yourself." His smirk deepened. "Don't worry," he said, his words dripping arrogance. "We won't serve leftovers tonight." A few guests gasped, others laughed nervously, unsure if they'd heard correctly. Eva's smile didn't fade. It grew colder, quieter. "Of course not," she replied evenly. "Some things can't be reheated. They burn too easily." Their eyes locked. A moment of silence stretched between them, heavy, electric. For a brief second, something flickered behind Daniel's confidence. Confusion, maybe even fear. But it vanished as quickly as it came. She turned and moved to her seat, her head held high. Every movement felt choreographed, like a queen returning to her own court in disguise. As the ceremony music began, the atmosphere thickened with whispers. Sophie glanced at Eva, her smile strained. "Why did she come?" she hissed under her breath. Daniel leaned closer to her. "Because she still wishes she was me," he said confidently, though his eyes flickered once more toward his ex-wife. But Eva didn't watch the altar. She watched the clock on her phone, disguised as a compact. Each passing minute brought her closer to midnight. Her lawyer's words echoed in her mind. "Once the clock strikes 12, The ownership transfer becomes official. A waiter leaned down beside her quietly, offering champagne. In a low voice, he whispered, "Ms. Carter, the press has arrived." Her eyes lifted slightly, calm, unreadable. "Perfect timing," she murmured. She raised her glass slowly, the liquid catching the golden light, and smiled toward the couple at the altar. He wanted her to witness his victory, but didn't know he was standing in the empire she owned. The music swelled, and as Sophie took Daniel's hand, Eva's gaze stayed locked, unblinking, steady, a storm behind serenity. Applause erupted as the newlyweds stood at the center of the grand ballroom. The chandeliers above scattered golden light across the guests, the champagne shimmered, and the orchestra played softly in the background. Everything about the moment screamed perfection until Daniel Hart raised his glass. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice commanding attention, his grin broad and confident. "If I could have a moment before dessert, I'd like to make a little toast." The chatter died instantly. Cameras turned toward him. Even the violinist paused mid-note. He held Sophie's hand, pulling her closer. "To love and to knowing when to leave the past where it belongs." Laughter rippled across the room. Sophie laughed too, though her smile seemed slightly uneasy. Daniel continued, enjoying every second of the spotlight. "You know," he added, eyes flicking deliberately toward Eva, "some people can't let go of old dreams. They cling to what's gone, thinking it still matters. But tonight proves that sometimes moving on is the best decision one can ever make." The guests laughed again, too loudly, trying to please their host. But the tension in the air was visible. Every camera lens found Eva, sitting calmly at her table, her champagne glass steady in her hand. She didn't flinch, didn't lower her eyes, didn't even blink. Daniel smirked, waiting for a reaction. He expected embarrassment, a win in his little game of dominance. But she only smiled politely, lifted her glass, and said clearly enough for the nearest tables to hear, "To growth, Daniel. Some people need to break things before they learn how to build." The laughter stopped. For a heartbeat, silence stretched thin across the ballroom. Then Daniel forced a laugh. "Still sharp, I see." Sophie squeezed his hand nervously. "Daniel, maybe—" He waved her off. "Relax, darling. It's just a joke." He turned to the crowd again. "No hard feelings, right, Evelyn?" Her eyes met his, calm, deep, unreadable. "None at all. I'm here to celebrate." There was something in her tone, too serene, too controlled, that made a few guests glance between them uneasily. Even Sophie frowned slightly, sensing something wrong beneath Eva's poise. The band resumed playing softly. Waiters began to move again, refilling glasses. The tension seemed to dissolve, or at least hide under polite laughter. Daniel turned to Sophie, whispering, "See? Still harmless." But as he said it, the clock on the grand mantel chimed once. It was midnight. Eva looked down at her phone. A single encrypted message had arrived. "Filed. It's done." She smiled, took a slow sip of her champagne, and looked up, her eyes landing on the large projection screen behind the stage, which was currently dark. The toast to leaving the past behind was about to be interrupted by the future he never saw coming. And as the last chime of midnight faded, the lights in the ballroom flickered once, then dimmed. The sound hit first, a loud echoing ding from the speaker system, followed by the sharp flicker of lights across the grand ballroom. Every conversation stopped mid-sentence. The music fell silent. The massive projection screen behind the wedding stage suddenly came alive, glowing with the familiar Daniel's Tech logo. Daniel blinked, confused. "What the—" Guests turned, whispering, phones already lifted to record. Reporters shifted from wedding photographers to journalists in seconds. Then over the speakers, a crisp, professional voice announced, "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining this evening. We interrupt with breaking corporate news. Haven Investments, the new parent company of Daniel's Tech, has called a sudden press announcement. The new CEO will address the public. Now." The ballroom filled with static and tension. Daniel forced a laugh, glancing around. "Must be a mistake," he said loudly, waving his hand. "Some publicity stunt." But the laughter didn't return. Every face turned toward the screen as the Daniels Tech logo dissolved into a new one. Haven Investments. Sleek, minimal, powerful. And then a title card appeared, announcing the new CEO of Haven Investments, Ms. Eva Carter. The room went still. Daniel's smile froze. Eva Carter? Who the hell is Eva Carter? He muttered. Sophie's hand slowly dropped from his arm. Gasps rippled through the crowd like a rising tide. Reporters surged forward, cameras flashing again. Daniel stumbled backward a step. This is impossible. Haven's board never... At that moment, Ms. Green, Eva's lawyer, appeared at the ballroom entrance, flanked by two men in black suits. She walked with quiet authority through the stunned crowd and approached the stage. Mr. Hart, she said, her voice steady, echoing across every microphone. I believe these belong to you. She placed a folder on the table in front of him. Daniel's trembling hands tore it open. His eyes darted across the legal text. Merger finalization, controlling shares, executive authority. And then he stopped on the last page. Effective immediately. Transfer of ownership to Eva Carter, sole proprietor of Haven Investments and parent entity Daniels Tech. Color drained from his face. This was filed tonight, he stammered. Midnight, to be exact, Miss Farmers Green replied. Public records just updated. You're now standing on company property that no longer belongs to you. The guests began to murmur louder. Phones recorded every second. Sophie's eyes filled with panic as she whispered, Daniel, you told me you owned everything. He didn't answer. He couldn't. His voice caught somewhere between rage and realization. Eva finally stood. Her movements were graceful, her expression calm, unshaken. As she walked toward the stage, every camera turned to her. She passed through the aisle like someone walking through time itself, from the woman he once erased to the woman who now owned his empire. When she reached the stage, Daniel looked from her to the lawyer, his mind racing. Evelyn, what are you doing? Get her out of here. Ms. Green smiled. Mr. Hart, I'd like to introduce you to your new boss, Ms. Eva Carter. Daniel froze. His head snapped toward his ex-wife. What did you say? He stared at Evelyn, at Eva, the name on the screen, the woman in front of him. Evelyn, is Eva Carter? He whispered, the blood draining from his face. Eva stopped him with a single quiet look. I warned you once, Daniel, she said softly. Never mix work with temptation. You always thought the world revolved around you. Now it rotates around my signature. Her words hung in the air, cold and precise. Sophie's breathing quickened. You planned this? She whispered, horrified. Eva smiled faintly, tilting her head. No, Sophie, he did. Every lie, every paper he signed. He built my empire himself. The crowd erupted into stunned whispers. Reporters shouted questions. Daniel stood frozen, staring at the documents, realizing the truth. His arrogance had handed her everything. Eva turned away slowly, her heels echoing against the marble floor as security stepped forward. Not to protect him, but to remove him. When a man builds his throne on another's sacrifice, it's only a matter of time before the crown finds its rightful owner. As Eva reached the exit, the screen behind her flickered once more, displaying the final line of the announcement. CEO Eva Carter will address the future of Daniels Tech at sunrise. The crowd gasped again. Sophie's voice cracked in panic. Daniel, what happens now? Daniel's face turned pale, eyes fixed on Eva's disappearing silhouette. He whispered almost to himself, She owns me. The hotel courtyard exploded in chaos. Camera flashes burst like lightning, microphones thrust forward, voices overlapping in a storm of questions. Mr. Hart, is it true you no longer own Daniels Tech? Mr. Hart, were you aware Haven Investments CEO was your ex-wife? How does it feel to lose your company on your wedding night? Daniel Hart tried to push through the crowd, his face pale under the glare of flashing bulbs. His tuxedo jacket hung crooked, his composure slipping further with every question. Inside the lobby, the echo of whispers and hurried footsteps filled the air. The once grand wedding had turned into a public spectacle. Guests who had once toasted him now avoided his eyes. At the far end of the corridor, Eva Carter stood by the elevator, her expression unreadable. Her lawyer, Ms. Green, beside her, calmly reviewed a file. When Daniel finally broke through the crowd and reached her, he looked nothing like the man who had once stood on a stage declaring himself untouchable. His voice cracked as he said, "Evelyn, please, we can fix this." She turned to face him, her tone calm, measured. "I already did." He stared at her, confused, desperate. "You can't mean this. The press, the investors, they'll destroy me." Eva's eyes softened for a brief moment, but only with pity. "They won't destroy you, Daniel. You did that yourself. I just turned on the lights so everyone could see it." The security team stepped closer, silent, waiting for her signal. "Evelyn," he took a step forward, lowering his voice. "You loved me once. You built everything with me. Doesn't that mean anything?" For the first time, she smiled. Small, sad, but genuine. "Yes. It means I know exactly how to take care of what we built, and how to protect it from you." Ms. Green nodded to the guards. "His access has already been revoked. It confirmed he's been removed from all company systems." Daniel's head snapped toward her, disbelief in his eyes. "You can't do that. It's my company." Eva didn't flinch. "It was. You signed it away the moment you filed it as a sole proprietorship. You just didn't read the fine print on the buyout you begged for." Her hands trembling as she helped him draft his first merger papers. "The night he said, 'You handle the legal language, I just make the deals.'" He never once looked at the fine print. Her voice, quiet but steady, echoed back to the present. "You once told me I'd never survive without you. But it turns out, Daniel, you couldn't survive without me." He froze, words gone, pride collapsing into silence. The security guards moved closer. Sophie appeared at the top of the stairs, makeup streaked, phone in hand, news headlines already filling her screen. "Daniel's Tech bought out by secret CEO Eva Carter, revealed as ex-wife." The title glared back at her in bold. She looked down at him with pure disgust. "You lied to me," she hissed. "You said you owned everything." Daniel turned toward her helplessly. "Sophie, please, I can explain." But she pulled the diamond ring from her finger, dropped it onto the marble floor with a sharp clink, and walked out through the crowd without looking back. The ring rolled to a stop at Eva's feet. For a second, time seemed to freeze. Eva bent slightly, picked up a napkin from a nearby table to wipe her hand. And on that napkin, faint and familiar, was a red lipstick stain. The same shade Sophie had worn when this all began. Her eyes lingered on it for a second. "Fitting," she murmured softly, placing the napkin down again. Daniel stood in the middle of the hallway, his empire gone, his pride stripped bare. Cameras still flashed through the windows. Eva turned to Ms. Green. "Ensure the press release goes live in 10 minutes. Then with quiet poise, she walked toward the exit. As the doors opened, the noise from outside poured in. Reporters shouting her name, flashes lighting the night like fire. She didn't stop. The world finally saw who really built the kingdom, and who was never meant to sit on its throne. Behind her, Daniel's voice broke in the distance, begging for a second chance. But Eva Carter never turned around. The city glowed beneath the fading sunset, streaks of gold melting into violet. Inside the top floor of Haven Tower, the office was silent, save for the hum of the evening air. Eva Carter stood before the tall glass window, arms crossed, watching the skyline she once thought she'd lost. The chaos from the night before had calmed. Daniel's downfall was on every news station, every screen. Her reflection looked stronger now. Not hardened, just whole. On her desk, two things lay side by side. Her CEO badge engraved with Eva Carter, Haven Investments, and her old wedding ring. The gold band caught the last light of dusk, small but heavy with memory. Voiceover. He thought revenge was loud. Turns out, silence echoes longer. She opened the drawer and gently placed the ring inside, next to an old photo of herself and Daniel from years ago, back when everything was simpler, before betrayal, before ambition turned cruel. The drawer shut with a soft click. A chapter closed. The television in the background played softly. A news anchor's calm voice filling the quiet. New CEO Eva Carter reshapes Daniel's Tech's future, vowing innovation, ethics, and inclusion. Industry analysts are calling it the most dramatic corporate turnaround in years. Eva smiled faintly, not from pride, but peace. Her younger self laughing beside Daniel in their old apartment, dreaming of success. Then Raines's wise voice echoing, "Power is quieter when unseen." The sky darkened fully now. City lights shimmered like the stars had come down to rest beneath her. Foreshadowing line, "Empires fall, but builders, they rise again." Ava turned off the lights and walked out.